Hey guys, in today's video, I'm going to share an unbelievable story full of twists and turns that will keep you hooked from start to finish. You will learn about the near-death experience of Sigismund Falk, a man who descended into hell, faced his greatest fears, and received a shocking revelation about what is about to happen in September 2024. Don't miss a single detail, because what he saw could change the way we see the future. Before we start, leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Let's go. My name is Sigismund Falk, and I have a story to tell that completely changed my life. I'm not a famous writer or spiritual leader. I'm just an ordinary man who went through something extraordinary. I worked my whole life as an electrician at a shipyard in Hamburg, Germany. He led a normal life, with ups and downs like everyone else. I have a wife, Greta, and 2 children. I have always been a practical man, with my feet on the ground. I never paid much attention to spiritual or religious matters. But that changed drastically after what happened to me. It all started with an accident at work in 1998. I was doing routine maintenance when a high-voltage cable hit me. The shock threw me against a metal wall. At the time, I thought it was just a scare, but I soon realized that the deal was serious. My shoulder was dislocated and the pain was unbearable. Over the next few months, I underwent several surgeries. The doctor said the pain would go away, but it never went away completely. That's when they started prescribing me oxycodone. At first, it seemed like a miracle. The pain lessened, and I felt able to lead a normal life again. But this relief came with a high price. Without realizing it, I started taking the pills not just for physical pain, but for anything. Stress at work. Oxycodone. Fight with Greta. Oxycodone. Over time, I could no longer go a day without taking it. My wife noticed something was wrong. She tried to talk to me, but I always refused. He said he could stop whenever he wanted, that everything was under control. But the truth is, I was lost. Addiction had taken over me, and I didn't know how to get out. And that's how I got to the day that changed everything. In a moment of confusion, I mixed the medicines. I took a dose of oxycodone thinking it was aspirin. It was an overdose. I collapsed in the bathroom, and the last thing I saw before blacking out was Greta's desperate face. What happened next? Well, it's hard to explain. It's an experience I'm still trying to understand, but I'll try to tell it as best I can, because what I experienced that day between life and death completely changed my view of the world and of myself. And who knows, maybe my story can help other people too. That day, I woke up feeling terrible. The pain in my shoulder was unbearable, and I could barely get out of bed. I dragged myself to the bathroom, determined to take something to ease the suffering. My head was just a mess, and I couldn't think straight. That's when the fatal error happened. I picked up the bottle of pills without even looking at it properly. I thought it was aspirin, but it was actually oxycodone, and it wasn't just a pill. I swallowed several at once, desperate for the pain to go away. Only after a few minutes did I realize something was wrong. Very wrong. I started to feel very dizzy. The bathroom seemed to revolve around me. My legs felt wobbly, and I leaned on the sink to keep from falling. I looked in the mirror and barely recognized my own face. He was pale. His eyes were glassy. That was when I understood what had happened. Overdose. I tried to scream for help, but my voice wouldn't come out. My throat felt closed. My legs gave out, and I collapsed onto the cold bathroom floor. I heard Greta knocking on the door, asking if I was okay. I wanted to respond, say I needed help, but I couldn't speak. My whole body felt too heavy. The last thing I saw was Greta's face when she managed to open the door. His eyes wide with terror, screaming for help. After that, everything went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but I remember waking up briefly in the ambulance. The flashing lights, the voices of the paramedics. They were talking fast, something about my vitals dropping. I wanted to say I was sorry, that it was an accident, but I couldn't speak. I felt a sting on my arm, probably injecting some medication. And then, darkness again. The next time I woke up, I was no longer in my body. It was a strange sensation, as if I were floating. I saw my own body lying on the hospital gurney, the doctors around trying to revive me. I heard their voices, talking about cardiac arrest. I watched as they used the defibrillator, my body jumping from the shock, but I didn't feel anything. It was like watching a movie. It was at that moment that I realized I was dying. Or maybe he was already dead. It was a feeling that was difficult to describe. There was no fear, no pain, just a deep certainty that something important was happening. And then, I felt like something was pulling me. An irresistible force dragging me away from that hospital room, away from my body, my life. And that is how my journey beyond life began. An experience that would take me to the darkest and brightest places imaginable. A trip that would forever change my understanding of life, death, and everything in between. It's hard to explain exactly what it was like to leave my body. It wasn't like waking up from a dream, nor like passing out. It was more like dissolving. In a moment I was there, trapped in that sick, addicted body. The next, he was free, light as a feather. The first thing I noticed was the silence. All those hospital noises, the beeping machines, the doctor's voices, my wife's crying, suddenly disappeared. It was complete, absolute silence. But it wasn't scary. It was peaceful. I looked down and saw my body on the stretcher. It was strange to see myself from the outside. It felt like I was looking at someone else. I saw the doctors working, trying to bring me back. Their mouths moved, but I heard nothing. Everything seemed to be happening in slow motion. I wanted to tell them that I was fine, that they didn't need to worry, but when I tried to speak, I realized I had no voice. It didn't actually have a mouth. There was no body. It was just consciousness, pure thought. I looked at my wife, Greta. She was in the corner of the room, crying. I wanted to hug her, tell her that I loved her, that I was sorry for everything, but he couldn't touch her. It was as if there was an invisible barrier between us. It was then that I noticed something strange. I could see through the hospital walls. It was as if they were made of frosted glass. I saw other rooms, other patients, doctors and nurses running through the corridors, all at the same time. And it wasn't just that. I began to realize that I could feel the thoughts and emotions of the people around me. They weren't words. They were more like colors and sensations. I could feel Greta's despair, the doctor's intense concentration, the fear and hope mixed in the air. Suddenly I felt a kind of pull, as if something was calling me. I looked up and saw a light. It was like nothing I had ever seen before. It was shiny, but it didn't hurt to look. It was warm and welcoming. Without thinking, I started moving towards that light. It wasn't walking or flying. It was more like flowing. The closer I got, the more I felt an immense peace surrounding me. All the problems, all the worries in my life seemed so small and far away now. That's when I heard a voice, not with my ears, but inside my mind. It was a gentle but firm voice. It said, "It is not your time yet, Sigismund. You have more to learn." And then, in the blink of an eye, I was yanked back, but not to the hospital, to another place, a place that would change everything I thought I knew about life and death. In an instant, the welcoming light disappeared. It was as if someone had turned off the sun. I found myself falling into a deep darkness, so dense that it seemed to have substance. It wasn't like falling out of a building or a plane. It was falling in all directions at once. The silence that was once comforting now became oppressive. It was an absolute void, which seemed to swallow everything. I tried to scream, but I had no voice. I tried to hold on to something, but there was nothing around me. It was just me and that infinite darkness. I can't say how long this fall lasted. It could have been seconds or centuries. Time seemed to no longer exist. The only thing I knew was that I was going deeper and deeper. Suddenly I started hearing sounds. At first, they were just distant whispers, but they were getting louder, clearer. They were screams. Screams of pain, of despair, of agony. They came from all directions, enveloping me like a storm of suffering. The air, if I can call it that, became heavy, suffocating. A strong smell of sulfur invaded my senses. The temperature started to rise. It wasn't an ordinary heat, it was something deeper, that seemed to burn my very essence. It was then that I saw it. Through the darkness, I began to make out shapes, shadows moving, writhing. They looked like lost souls, trapped in that terrible place. I wanted to help them, but I could do nothing but watch their torment. The ground rose abruptly beneath my feet. It was rough, full of cracks from which unbearable heat was escaping. Every step I took was painful, as if I were walking on hot shards of glass. I looked around me and saw a desolate landscape. The sky, if you could call it that, was a dark red, like clotted blood. There was no sun, moon, or stars, just a diffuse non-reddish light that seemed to come from nowhere. The horizon was broken by distorted rock formations, which seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. Among these rocks, I saw creatures. They were neither human nor animals. They were something different, something my mind refused to fully comprehend. It was at that moment that I understood where I was. This was hell, not the hell of the books or the movies, but something much more real and terrible. It was a place of pure suffering, of total absence of hope. And worst of all, I knew I deserved to be there. Every scream I heard, every tortured soul I saw, reminded me of my mistakes, my failures, the addiction, the lies, the people I had hurt. All of this weighed on me like a mountain. I started walking, not knowing where to go. Every step was agony, not just the physical pain, but the guilt, the regret. I was lost, alone, condemned to wander forever in that horrible place. But something inside me refused to give up. A small flame of hope that, for some reason, hadn't been completely extinguished. And it was this flame that made me keep walking, even without knowing if there was any destination ahead of me. While walking through that hellish landscape, something strange began to happen. The scenery around me began to change, as if it was dissolving. The rocks, the burning ground, everything gradually disappeared. I saw myself floating in an empty space, neither dark nor light. It was like being in the middle of nowhere. Suddenly, I felt a presence. I couldn't see anything, but I knew I wasn't alone. It was an overwhelming feeling, as if I were facing something immense, powerful, beyond my understanding. Then I heard a voice. It was not a voice like the one we hear with our ears. It was more like the words were being recorded directly into my mind. The voice said, "Sigismund Falk, you are here to be judged." At that moment, I felt a fear like I had never felt before. It wasn't the fear of pain or death. It was a deeper fear, the fear of facing all my actions, all my thoughts, everything I had ever done or not done in life. And then it began. It was as if my entire life was playing before my eyes, but not like a movie. It was more like I was reliving every moment, every decision. But the scary thing was that I wasn't just reliving my own experiences. I could feel the impact of my actions on others. I felt Greta's pain every time I lied about my addiction. I felt my children's fear when they saw me altered by the medication. I felt the disappointment of my coworkers when I failed them because of their addiction. It was an avalanche of emotions and sensations, so intense that I thought I was going to tear myself apart. But it wasn't just the bad things. I also felt the joy I brought to other people, the comfort I gave to a friend in a difficult time. My parents were proud when I graduated, Greta's love on our wedding day. It was as if every action, every word, every thought was being weighed on a cosmic scale. During this entire process, I felt that presence watching me. It wasn't a look of judgment or condemnation. It was more understanding, as if that being, whatever it was, perfectly understood every choice I had made, every circumstance that led me to be who I was. When it was all over, I was left there, floating in the void, feeling completely exposed. There were no more secrets, no more lies. Everything I was, all the good and all the bad, was there, naked and raw. The voice spoke again. You have seen your life through the eyes of truth. What have you learned? I was silent for a moment, trying to process everything I had experienced. Then the words came. I learned that every action has consequences, that what we do affects not only ourselves but everyone around us. I learned that I wasted a lot of time and potential with addiction, hurting the people I love. But I also learned that there is still goodness in me, that I can still make a difference. There was a long silence. Then the voice said, You understand the lesson, but your journey is not over yet. There is more you need to see, more you need to understand. And with that, I felt that sensation of movement again. I was being taken to another place. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew that whatever it was, it would be crucial to my understanding. After the trial, I found myself on a narrow walkway. It was made of a substance I couldn't identify. It wasn't metal, it wasn't stone, it wasn't wood. It was something ethereal. The walkway stretched over a chasm so deep that I couldn't see the bottom. I started walking. Every step was a challenge. The walkway felt unstable, as if it could disappear at any moment. As I advanced, I began to hear sounds coming from the abyss. At first, it was just distant murmurs, but they were getting louder, clearer. They were voices. Thousands, maybe millions of voices. Some screamed in agony, others begged for help. Some cursed and cursed, others cried softly. It was a chorus of suffering that seemed to have no end. I looked down and saw where the voices were coming from. In the abyss, there were countless pits of fire. In each pit, I saw trapped souls, writhing in torment. The sight was so horrible that I almost fell off the catwalk. But the worst wasn't what I saw or heard. That's what I felt. An overwhelming feeling of despair and loneliness. Every soul in those pits was completely alone in their suffering. There was no comfort. There was no hope. Just an eternity of pain and regret. I kept walking, but each step was more difficult than the last. The weight of that vision, those feelings, was almost unbearable. I wanted to help those souls. I wanted to get them out of there, but I knew I couldn't do anything. It was then that I understood. Those souls. They were just like me. People who had made mistakes, who had lost their way. The only difference was that I had been given a second chance, an opportunity to see all this and learn. I reached the end of the walkway and found myself faced with a choice. In front of me were two doors. One was made of a warm, inviting golden light. The other was dark, cold, scary. I knew, without anyone telling me, that the choice I made would determine my destiny. I stood there, paralyzed by indecision. Part of me desperately wanted to go to the door of light, to escape all this horror. But another part knew there was still something I needed to face, that my journey was not complete. I took a deep breath, or at least did the spiritual equivalent of it, and turned toward the dark door. She knew that whatever lay beyond her would be difficult, perhaps even terrible. But I also knew it was necessary. With one last glance at the walkway and the abyss beyond, I stepped through the dark door. What awaited me on the other side would forever change my understanding of myself and the nature of reality. As I walked through the dark door, I found myself in a place that defied understanding. It was a vast space, with no visible limits, but at the same time claustrophobic. The air, if I can call it that, was heavy, oppressive. There was a weak light, of undefined origin, that barely illuminated the room. It was then that I saw them. The creatures. They were huge, bigger than anything I had ever seen on Earth. They looked like a grotesque mixture of worm and dragon, with long, sinuous bodies covered in thick, scaly skin. Their mouths were full of razor-sharp teeth, and their eyes glowed with an evil intelligence that chilled me to the core. They moved slowly around me, watching me. I could feel his hunger, his evil. I knew they wanted to devour me, not just my body, if I still had one, but my very essence. I tried to run away, but there was nowhere to go. It was surrounded. The creatures got closer and closer, their huge bodies blocking any escape route. The fear I felt in that moment was unlike anything I had ever experienced. It was a primordial, visceral terror. It was then that I heard their voices. They didn't speak with sounds, but directly in my mind. And what they said was even worse than his appearance. "You're ours now," they said. "Your soul belongs to us. All your mistakes, all your failures, we feed on them. You will never escape. You are doomed to spend eternity with us." Every word was like a stab. I wanted to scream. I wanted to fight. But I was paralyzed by fear. The creatures continued to approach, their mouths opening, ready to swallow me. In that moment of absolute despair, something inside me changed. A voice, small but firm, appeared in the back of my mind. "No," said the voice. "This isn't real. This isn't me." I suddenly remembered everything I had seen and learned during my journey, the trial, the catwalk, the suffering souls. It had all been a lesson, and now I understood what that lesson was. These creatures, they were the manifestation of my deepest fears. My fear of failing, of being unlovable, of being beyond redemption. They fed on this fear. They grew with it. With this understanding, I felt a strength arise within me. It wasn't a physical force, but something deeper. It was the strength of acceptance. To accept myself as I was, with all my flaws and imperfections. I looked at the creatures and said, not with my voice, but with my entire being, "You have no power over me. I recognize my mistakes, but I also recognize my worth. I am not perfect, but I am willing to learn and grow." As he spoke, the creatures began to shrink. Their huge bodies withered, their sharp teeth becoming harmless. The darkness around me dissipated, replaced by a soft light. When it was all over, I found myself alone in an empty space. The creatures had completely disappeared. In its place, I felt a deep peace. I had faced my inner demons and survived. But I knew my journey wasn't over yet. There was one more step, one more lesson to learn. And so I let myself be taken to the next stage of my experience. After facing the creatures, I felt a change in the environment around me. The soft light that had appeared began to intensify, becoming brighter and brighter. It was as if the entire space was filling with light. At first, the light was comforting, warm, but as it got stronger, it started to become almost painful. I tried to protect my eyes, but it was no use. The light seemed to penetrate my entire being. And then, suddenly, I fell. It wasn't like falling out of a building or a plane. It was as if the very ground had disappeared from beneath my feet. It was falling through the light, which now seemed liquid, like an endless ocean of brilliance. The feeling was indescribable. It was as if every atom of my being was being disintegrated and reintegrated thousands of times per second. There was no longer any distinction between me and the light. We were one thing. During this fall, or this dive, I started to have visions. I saw the entire history of the universe unfold before me. The Big Bang, the formation of galaxies, the birth and death of stars. I saw the Earth form, life emerge and evolve. I saw civilizations born, flourish, and disappear. And in the midst of it all, I saw my own life. Not just this life, but every life I've ever lived. I saw myself as a warrior in an ancient land, as a monk seeking enlightenment, as a mother caring for her children in times of war. Each life was unique, each experience precious. I understood then that my current existence, my life as Sigismund Falk, was just one chapter in a much larger story. The mistakes I had made, the addiction that almost destroyed me, were part of a learning process that spanned many lifetimes. But the vision didn't stop there. I also saw the future, not specific events, but possibilities. I saw a world changing, facing immense challenges, climate change, conflicts, technological revolutions, and I saw the role that each individual could play in that future. It was then that I heard a voice. It wasn't an external voice, but it seemed to come from within me and from everywhere at the same time. The voice said, "Do you understand now? Every life, every experience, every choice is part of something greater. You are not just Sigismund Falk. You are an expression of the universe knowing itself." In that moment, I felt a deep connection with everything that exists. I understood that we are not separate from each other or the universe. We are all part of a great web of existence, each playing our unique role. The fall, or plunge, began to slow. The light gradually dimmed. I felt like I was going back, although I didn't know exactly where, but I knew that wherever I went, I would no longer be the same. I had gained a perspective that would forever change the way I saw the world and my place in it. Slowly, the light dissipated. The sounds began to return, first distant, then increasingly clearer. I felt a weight returning to my body, as if I was being pulled back into physical reality. I opened my eyes and found myself back in the hospital. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling, the beeping of machines, the smell of disinfectant. Everything felt strangely familiar and yet completely new at the same time. I saw faces all around me. Doctors, nurses, my wife Greta. Everyone looked surprised and relieved. I heard someone say, "It's a miracle. He's back." I tried to speak, but my throat was dry and sore from the breathing tube. A nurse gently stopped me from moving, telling me I needed to stay still. Little by little, I began to understand what had happened. I had been in a coma for almost a week. The doctors had given up hope. My family was already preparing for the worst. But here I was, back, alive, transformed. In the days that followed, as I recovered in the hospital, I tried to process everything I had experienced. It was difficult to put into words. How do I explain to people that I had traveled beyond death, that I had faced my inner demons, had seen the story of the universe unfold before my eyes? At first, I didn't tell anyone, not even Greta. I was afraid they would think I was crazy, or that it was just a hallucination caused by the medication. But the experience was so vivid, so real, that I knew it couldn't have just been a dream. Little by little, I started to notice changes in myself. The pain in my shoulder, which had been a constant in my life for so long, had eased considerably. The doctors couldn't explain it, but I knew it was a result of my experience. More than that, my perspective on life had completely changed. The things that once worried me so much, money, status, material possessions, now seemed so insignificant. I had seen the vastness of the universe. I had experienced a deep connection with everything that exists. How could I worry about such small things after that? The most important thing was that I no longer felt any desire to take the medication. The addiction that had controlled my life for so long simply wasn't there anymore. It was as if that part of me had been burned away during my journey, leaving only ashes. When I was finally released from the hospital, I came home a different man. Greta noticed the change immediately. She said my eyes were different, that I looked more at peace. It was then that I decided to tell her about my experience. We sat together one night, after the kids had gone to bed, and I told her everything. About the trial, the catwalk, the creatures, the dive into the light. I talked about the lessons I had learned, about the new perspective I had gained. To my surprise, Greta didn't think I was crazy. She listened attentively, sometimes with tears in her eyes. When I finished, she hugged me tight and said, "I knew something had changed in you. Now I understand why." In the months that followed, I began to rebuild my life. I went back to work, but with a new attitude. I started getting more involved in the community, helping people who were struggling with addiction. I felt like I had been given a second chance and wanted to use it to make a difference. But there was something more. Something I had seen during my experience that I couldn't get out of my head. a vision of the future that left me both anxious and hopeful. During my near-death experience, especially during the dive into the light, I had visions of the future. They were not specific predictions, but rather glimpses of possibilities, of paths that humanity could follow. I saw a rapidly changing world, technological advances that seemed like something out of science fiction movies, artificial intelligence capable of thinking and feeling, humans merging with machines. But I also saw the challenges that would come with this progress, complex ethical issues, the risk of losing our humanity amidst so much technology. I saw dramatic climate changes transforming the face of the planet, submerged cities, deserts where there were forests before. But I also saw communities coming together to face these challenges, developing new ways of living in harmony with nature. I saw conflicts and wars, but also peace movements that crossed borders and united people from all cultures. I saw humanity struggling to find its place in a vast and mysterious universe. But what marked me most was a date, the end of September 2024. I didn't know exactly what would happen on that date, but I felt like it would be the beginning of something important, a change, a transformation on a global scale. In the years following my experience, I found myself constantly thinking about this date. As we got closer to 2024, I started to notice signs, little things that seemed to confirm what I had seen, advances in artificial intelligence that exceeded all expectations. Extreme weather events are becoming increasingly frequent, social movements gaining strength around the world. Everything seemed to be lining up for some kind of defining moment. As September 2024 approaches, I feel a mixture of anxiety and hope. Anxiety because I know that big changes can bring challenges and difficulties, but hope because I also know that these changes bring opportunities for growth, for evolution. I don't know exactly what will happen. I am not a prophet, nor do I have all the answers. I'm just a man who's had a glimpse of something bigger and is trying to understand what it means. What I do know is that we are on the verge of something important, something that will demand the best from all of us. We will need compassion, courage, wisdom. We will need to remember our connection to each other and the universe around us. As I write this, September 2024 is just a few months away. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I'm ready to face it. My near-death experience taught me that we are stronger, more resilient, and more connected than we realize. So, as we wait to see what the future brings, I have a message for anyone reading this. Don't be afraid. We are all on this journey together, and together, we can face any challenge the future presents us with. The universe is vast and mysterious, but it is also full of possibilities, and each of us has a role to play in the great story that is unfolding. So stay tuned, keep your heart open, and be ready for the change that is coming. Because something tells me that September 2024 will be just the beginning of an exciting new journey for us all.